So ever since Nikon released the 35mm f1.4 lens, I've been interested to see how it would perform when it comes to astrophotography. And more specifically, I wanted to see how it would compare to my 35mm f1.8 S-line lens. That's a lens I've had for quite a while. I love using that to shoot the night sky. But in this video, we're going to do some side-by-side comparisons, and we'll see how the two lenses stack up against each other.
Alright, so here in Lightroom, I have a bunch of night sky images taken with both of the lenses. Now, these are all RAW files imported with Lightroom's default settings, but I did go ahead and make some contrast and white balance adjustments to these files, just so that we can see what's going on a little bit better. Now, I haven't done like any lens corrections or vignette adjustments or chromatic aberration adjustments or anything like that to these images. I've only done some exposure, contrast, and white balance adjustments. So here's an example of an adjustment I made. Here's before and after. And just one more example. Here's before and after. Now I shot everything with my 45 megapixel Nikon Z7II, and most of these shots were just static shots on a tripod. So I took some 15-second and 10-second exposures, but I also have some examples using a star tracker where I shot some 1-minute exposures with both of the lenses as well. But anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at our first comparison. And we'll take a look at both lenses wide open. And if I zoom into the center, the 1.8 lens definitely looks sharper to me here. And if we go out to the edge, it's pretty much the same thing. The 1.8 looks sharper. And if we take a look up top here, I'm definitely seeing some issues with the 1.4 lens. I'm seeing some obvious astigmatism in these stars. So they kind of look like they have like wings. They just look very deformed. And there's also some noticeable color fringing. And if we look at the 1.8 lens, the stars here look really good. So the performance is for sure much more consistent edge to edge on the 1.8 lens. But let's go ahead and take a look at both lenses at f1.8. And you'll see here that the issue with the stars has improved a little bit, but it's still very noticeable. The stars just don't look quite as pinpoint, and there's some color fringing here as well. And if we look back at the center, the 1.8 is still just a little bit sharper. But if you look globally, you can see that the 1.8 lens has quite a bit more vignetting going on compared to the 1.4 lens. Alright, let's see what happens at f2 now. And again, you can see more vignetting on the 1.8 lens, but let's look at the problem area up top. So now it looks like that astigmatism in the stars has significantly improved in the 1.4 lens, but it's still not looking quite as good as the 1.8 lens. And the sharpness in the center is pretty much equal, but the stars definitely look a little bit better on the edges on the 1.8 lens. Alright, let's also look at some examples at f2.8. And the vignetting has improved a ton on the 1.8 lens, but there's still a bit more than on the 1.4 lens. And if we look at the center here, we basically get equal sharpness. And then in the corners and up top, they are basically performing the same here. So now let's move on to another shot. We'll look at some wide open examples first. And again, just like in the previous example, we see a sharper image on the 1.8 lens. And if we look up top, we again see the astigmatism issues. It kind of looks like a bunch of like UFOs there instead of stars. And if we switch to f1.8, we see a little improvement, but the stars in the corner still look pretty bad on the 1.4 lens. Looking at f2 now, the stars have gotten better still, but the 1.8 lens definitely looks better. And then at f2.8, the lenses are a lot more similar now, but there's still a little more color fringing on the 1.4 lens, but it looks quite a lot better than it did at the larger apertures. So next we have some 10-second exposures. I can definitely see more vignetting on the 1.8 lens again. And when we zoom into 100%, we can see the issue on the 1.4 lens. The stars here are just not looking too good. And at f1.8, we see a similar result as the other compositions. still noticing some significant astigmatism, and the sharpness is still holding up better on the 1.8 lens as well. And then at f2, we continue to see some improvement just like we did in the earlier examples. Alright, so next we'll look at some 1-minute exposures that I captured while the camera was mounted on a star tracker. So it looks like the focus might have been off a little bit on the 1.4 lens, but we can still do some comparisons. I'm definitely seeing more color fringing on the 1.4 lens. And if we look at the edges here, the stars look pretty bad on the left, whereas the 1.8 lens on the right looks very good. There's a bit of color fringing here too, but the image overall looks way better. And if we move to f1.8, we again see some improvement on the aberrations, but they are still not looking great. And if we look over here on this side, it's the same story. Pretty big difference in performance here. Now at f2, things are looking a bit better, but the 1.4 lens still has some noticeable issues. The 1.8 lens is much better. The sharpness in the center is fairly equal, but I do notice more chromatic aberrations on the 1.4 lens. And then at f2.8, things have cleaned up quite a bit, but I still think that the 1.8 lens is performing a little bit better. But overall at f2.8, both images look pretty good. And here's just another 1-minute exposure at f2. So the 1.4 lens is showing more color fringing in the stars. And then of course we're seeing a better performance on the 1.8 lens when it comes to the edges and the corners. Alright, so what are my conclusions here? Well, when it comes to astrophotography, the 1.8 lens is definitely a better performer. I guess this isn't really much of a surprise given that the 1.8 lens is an S-line lens that costs a couple hundred more than the 35mm 1.4 lens. The 1.8 lens does have more of a vignetting issue than the 1.4 lens, but I mean that's easily corrected in post-processing, whereas the astigmatism issue seen in the 1.4 lens, I mean that's going to be more of an issue to deal with, especially at those wider apertures where the issue is quite noticeable. Now you do get a faster maximum aperture with the 1.4 lens, but I honestly, wouldn't want to use it for nightscapes just because those aberrations are so noticeable. Plus there's more color fringing with that lens as well, and it's a little bit softer as well. So I think that the 1.8 lens is definitely a better performer, and you're going to get much better results with that lens overall. And I think that makes the extra cost worth it. But let me know in the comments what you think about these lenses, and I hope that these comparisons were useful for you. But anyway, that's it for now. I'll see you on the next video.